Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Reap the Spoils. I'm Mark Sullivan.
I'm Delilah Lugo.
And I'm Jason Kwasnicki.
We took a month-long break over the holidays, but we are back in full swing with a video game to talk about. Reap the Spoils is a Spoilercast podcast where we take a video game, we play it, we talk about it, we spoil it. So, if you haven't played the video game that we're talking about today, I would implore you to pause this episode and go play that video game and then come back and then listen to this episode because we don't want to ruin the video game for you. Speaking of Delilah, what game are we talking about?
Uncharted 2: A Thief's End. I almost said... I did say that. Sorry. Among Thieves.
There's a couple too many Uncharteds. Getting them subtitles
confused. I thought you were making a joke there, and then I realized you weren't.
No. Oh, my bad. Uncharted 2: Among Thieves.
There we go. All right, cool. I didn't put that wrong. No, I didn't. Okay.
No, I read it and yet still said A Thief's End.
That's fine.
Sure, you're not getting a little elderly there? Like, what game
oh, yeah, no, definitely dementia hit.
Where's my pudding?
Yeah, we're talking about Uncharted 2, Among Thieves. Came out in 2009, so you've had plenty of time to play it, but your final warning right about now, if you have not played Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, go and play it and then come back to this episode and listen to the episode. I definitely don't want to ruin that game for you. That being said, are y'all ready to jump into a history lesson?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, so as we previously covered in our 5th episode of Reap the Spoils, Uncharted 1: Drake's Fortune released on November 19th, 2007. I definitely recommend going and playing that game and also listening to our episode on it before you play this game and listen to this episode because, we'll probably be spoiling what there is to spoil in Uncharted 1, if anything important. So yeah, go play that game and then listen to that episode and then come back to here. So yeah, that released in 2007.
There's not much to spoil from the first one other than, hey, these characters know each other.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's not really much, but I'd still recommend going to play it. So yeah, Naughty Dog developed 2007, first Uncharted game. As we kind of discussed in our episode of that, it's kind of a good proof of concept, but not the best execution. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit when we talk about how I personally feel that this game improves on a lot of Uncharted's one's ideas.
I feel like it's the biggest leap in terms of installment to installment. I feel like this one was the biggest leap.
I would agree
for the franchise.
But we'll talk about that soon. This game was revealed. I didn't know this. This game was revealed through Game Informer in December 2008.
That was a thing.
Yeah, the first teaser trailer was Drake. The one of the earliest scenes we see in the game, Drake going through the snow and picking up the Perba. And then the second trailer that released, I want to say a month or two later. Another teaser trailer was him hanging out of the train. 2 segments from that we see within the first 15 to 20 minutes of gameplay in the game. Mm-hmm. Which is a pretty interesting and cool way, not only to, as we'll talk about, to open up your game, but to kind of reveal it. It kind of, if there's a way to get you hooked and get you interested.
It's res, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just mean from a set piece or spectacle standpoint, like that's a cool way to get you interested, is to, and it was a good way to open the game, as we'll talk about soon. But that's kind of how they revealed the game and showed the earliest footage of it. The game had a development cycle of only 22 months, less than 2 years, which is
those were the days, man.
Yeah.
Studios were just pumping out games.
Yeah. 22 months, and 6 months of that were pre-production time. And yeah, I don't have much for this one. The game released for PS3 on October 13th, 2009. It also came to PS4 on October 9th, 2015 through the Nathan Drake collection, which I'm pretty sure is the version all of us played for this podcast.
Fun fact, this is a bit of development. I recently, where was I reading this or listening to this? Anyway, basically, development fun fact. Neil Druckmann, who is now what is his official title? Is it vice president or president?
Co-president, I think.
Co-president.
Yeah.
So he was helping out with writing with this game. He originally wanted to have Elena killed in this game, and everybody laughed at him, rightfully so. So,
wow, that's I didn't actually know that. It's interesting.
I didn't either.
Spoilers: Elena doesn't die in this game.
Yeah, it was kind of like how the director of Return of the Jedi wanted to kill Han Solo, and George Lucas was like, "No, Han Solo doesn't die."
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, Neil Druckmann and was it Bruce Straley or Josh Scher co-wrote the game with Amy Hennig?
I
want to say
it was Straley.
I want to say it was Josh Scher.
Straley is usually tied to more of the actual design elements. Although he does have or has had, when he was there, especially for projects that he directly directed, input on the story, and he had overall say. So like the original Last of Us, he did have input on that, and
to
help.
To just to go ahead and correct myself a little bit. Yeah, no, or to confirm what I said. Josh Scher was co-written by Amy Hennig, Neil Druckmann, and Josh Scher. Bruce Straley was the co-director with Amy Hennig.
Right.
Just to clear that up. But yeah, that's kind of the end of the history lesson that I had. I didn't have much more than that. Do we want to just jump into talking about the game now?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
Jump in. We'll start with the ending. And jump back over to the opening. There's not really much to. That's the kind of the thing with Uncharted games, at least the original trilogy. There's not really much to say, quite about their ending. It's you spend the whole. You know what? Yeah, let's come back to the ending. Let's talk about the ending later. Just because there's some aspects that we should touch on first before we get there. So let's talk about the opening of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the game, like Jason said, opens in media res, where Nate's on a train that's hanging off a cliff and has to climb up the train and then go trudging through snow and finds this mysterious dagger, and then it goes back in the past. How did you guys feel about this? If you can dig back to when you felt when you first played the game, how did you guys feel about this opening? Was it a strong opening?
I think for the time, it was definitely a strong opening because of how visually beautiful it looked. Like, for that time, it was really graphically impressive. But also just like from a gameplay standpoint, the way they you traverse up that train was kind of groundbreaking for the time, from what I remember. Now playing it again in 2021, it doesn't, a lot of games have adopted that a little bit. But at the time, it was definitely a nice change.
It also serves as a good tutorial. Pretty much every main mechanic and even shooting somewhat is shown off. There's like one or two guys that like pop out at you, and you have to shoot locks to open some of the doors. It's definitely solid. It's a solid opening.
And even continuing that with the next chapter, which does go take us back in time to, you open you open the game with that, and the question becomes, how the hell did we get ourselves into this?
That's the purpose of in media res.
Freeze frame record scratch. You're probably wondering how I got myself in this situation.
That's why like 90% of books that are written today start in media res. Twilight starts in media res. It's very rare nowadays for stories to actually start at the beginning.
Jason, Twilight connoisseur. coming through with the knowledge.
It was just the first example that came off the top of my head.
I know, I'm just messing.
The only big one I can think about that doesn't is Harry Potter.
Yeah. But anyway, like you said, with the opening chapter kind of acting as a tutorial, like a decent tutorial, that's continued in the second chapter. I mean, obviously, it's the beginning of the game. You want to try and tutorialize as much as you can in those first few chapters, but giving us that separate setting, going back in time to when him and Harry meet up, decide that they're going to rip off this mysterious client who's after a Mongolian oil lamp that's just in a museum for some reason. He wants that. It then becomes a heist mission rather than a survival mission.
Yeah.
And with that, since there wasn't really any way to introduce this mechanic in that opening chapter, we get a pretty good tutorial and a pretty good setting for it on the new stealth mechanics that they add in the game, which I thought was smart.
Yeah, because there wasn't really much stealth in the first game. Like I feel like there was some of it. I can't remember, but...
So there was no stealth in the original.
None,
version.
Right? Okay,
yeah, because that's the thing is we played the Nathan Drake collection for the first one. I don't think any of us went back and played the original PS3 release, and I think they added in like some of the stealth mechanics into the Nathan Drake collection release, but the original Uncharted didn't have it. It was all just very wave-based shooter, as we had discussed in our Uncharted episode.
Yeah, and that section was just full stealth, but they didn't really have many other sections like that. That was like the only one, and that was to introduce the mechanic so that you can optionally use it.
Yeah.
The opening of using the in media res opening and flashing back and forth between that and the opening exposition and the heist mission, it's a good way to use the train sequence. Well, not the entire sequence, but you use that train opening to hook the audience, because the expositions, you don't want to open up with that exposition. It's relatively, you never want to open up with exposition unless you're fucking J.R.R. Tolkien. And you also get to have this cool heist. You're going back and forth. The stealth section by itself probably would have been pretty boring if we weren't coming off the heels of, being on death's door, hanging off a cliff on a train. So it was pretty cleverly put together to rope you in.
And there's only been one other Uncharted game. That's not true. There's two other Uncharted games that have started in media res, without going into what is happening at those at the openings of those games. Uncharted 4 did, and Uncharted Golden Abyss began in media res. 3 opened up present day, and so did 1. But with that in mind, even with Uncharted 4 being my personal favorite Uncharted, 2's opening remains one of the best Uncharted, definitely the best Uncharted video game openings, one of the best video game openings, period. If you ask me.
Yeah, I agree. I
actually think 4 is better than this one.
Okay. I mean, that's fair.
Because 4, the reason being, without actually saying what it is that it takes place almost entirely gameplay, and through the gameplay, it gives you a look at the state of the character of Nathan Drake, where he's at.
That's fair. That's a fair point. Yeah, I can't really argue with that. It's all a matter of subjectivity.
This is still great.
Yeah.
But the thing is that Uncharted 4 is telling. It's almost even in an entirely different genre, just because this is at a point where Uncharted was still very much in the pulp action genre.
Yeah, but like a thematic.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Uncharted 4 is much more of a character focused story.
I agree.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, so that whole heist mission ultimately culminates in really, this isn't really outlined much in the notes, but like I feel like it should be talked about. Harry's betrayal. It's hard to talk about it's hard to talk about your thoughts on like some of this stuff on a game that we all played like God knows how many years before. And we're
Yeah,
just replaying
totally.
now, but like Harry's betrayal, can you like dig back into that Wayback Machine and think like, did you
I
see
knew
that
that was going to
coming?
happen. I knew that was going to
Yeah.
happen the moment you saw Harry. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, his facial expressions kind of gave it away. He was kind of being a dick from the beginning a little bit. I didn't feel betrayed by him at all. Now, if someone like Tenzin would have betrayed Nathan Drake, then I would have been
Yeah.
like, wait, what?
Tenzin, the best character in the entire series.
um
Sure.
what I found kind of funny replaying the game and just during that bit when you go into the museum to get the oil lamp and Harry goes to leave and winds up leaving you. The writing was a little weird and inconsistent there. Like
Yeah.
How so? What do you
no,
mean?
just dialogue. I mean, to be specific, I
Oh,
mean dialogue in how Harry spoke to Nate. He seemed ready for both of them to leave and expressed that, and then next thing you know, he's pulling up the rope saying, this is where we part ways." It's like I feel like his line of this is like really nitpicky. I feel like his line of dialogue before that could have been a little more vague, and it still would have been just as surprising if it was surprising to the any player at all.
mm.
I can't say that when I played this game for the first time, I was totally shocked by Harry
No.
betraying Nate.
I think
But
the
I mean,
problem is,
the title of the game is Among Thieves.
Right.
Like,
yeah. I think the problem is they didn't give me enough time to like Harry enough to feel betrayed by him. It was just
right.
kind of like, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
you're just a dick.
yeah,
Moving on.
And honestly, Harry was never really meant to be that important of a character. He just facilitates a lot of plot stuff.
Yeah.
It's really Chloe that
Mm-hmm.
is supposed to take on that
and
role, but we'll discuss that as we go on.
yeah. So I guess that's something we can talk about a little bit more. Jason, you can probably corroborate this, but like I was pretty critical of the dialogue writing and the writing in general of the first game. Just because at the beginning of the game it felt very stiff. Phoned in. I like you said, the jump from game to game and improvement has never been bigger in the series than from 1 to 2, and that's definitely true of the writing. Because any complaints I had about that in the first game are totally absent in the second.
Well, one of the things I think that was probably going through Amy Hennig's head was in the first game, I think they were trying to create Nathan Drake as what is referred to as like an iconic character, like a James Bond or basically, or an Indiana Jones, a character that doesn't really change essentially that much. I mean, Indiana Jones does have slight arcs, but like they essentially remain the same person throughout most of their stories. Whereas with this game, they attempted to actually give Nathan an arc more and have him change more, which makes him way more relatable. And like you said, the writing itself of the dialogue and the relationships between characters and how they interact with each other definitely flows more naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
That's why they gave him all those shitty one-liners in the first one. Whereas in this one, when Nate makes a sarcastic remark, it usually ties into the relationship he has with that character specifically.
Well,
and it comes off better.
There's also a big difference in dynamic in this game than there is from the first one. I feel like the majority of the time in this game, at least it's definitely increased in this game, you're not alone. You more often have a companion character with you in this game, I feel, than in the first one.
Yeah.
Because in the first one you spend a lot of time looking for Elena. This time you're partnered with Harry, and then you're partnered with Sully, and then you're partnered with Chloe. Later Elena for a big portion of the game. Tenzin.
Yeah, and it's Nate becomes much more charismatic and funny when he's making jokes about Tenzin and how he can't understand a word he's saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what they ultimately find that they're after is the is first of all Shamballa, and soon after the Chintimani stone. Is this an is this an interesting adventure, I guess? Do the pieces that unravel throughout this game, do they remain interesting? Do they remain captivating, even surprising at all? Is this like, I guess, a fun story? Are these interesting plot devices? Is what I'm trying to get at. It's kind of a hard question to like put into words.
I know what you're saying. This specifically, like Jason was saying before, it's still leaning into that pulp action, kind of like Indiana Jones, where like the what's best about it is how the characters are interacting with each other, not necessarily the end goal, which in this case was the Chintimani stone. And even when you get there and you figure out what it actually is, it's like, okay, that's fine. Now he's going to take some tree sap and turn into the worst boss fight ever. Especially on crushing mode.
Yeah,
But,
we'll get to that. We'll get to that. I actually think in terms of the mystic, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess mystic elements, yeah. I think of the series, this was probably my favorite one, just because in the end it didn't turn out. I mean, all of them have some sort of mysticism to it, but it's like this is one with, I guess, more ramifications, where it's literally a weapon of mass destruction that makes people semi-invincible. And you have references throughout the game to like Tamerlane and Genghis Khan and famous dictators of past. He flat out, the main villain,
feel like
gives a speech about them.
I feel like you missed the biggest one.
Oh yeah, Hitler and Stalin.
Yeah, where you genuinely find
dead Nazis.
From Carl Schaefer's expedition.
Right. So and so I found this one the most interesting. I found this one also the most interesting because it actually tied into the arc they were trying to give to Nate, even though they don't quite land. The story of Nate's arc gets a bit muddled about 80% of the way through, but I guess we'll talk about that when we talk about.
I would say let's talk.
And,
I would say let's talk about that now. Let's just go ahead.
Because it does tie into the characters and the structure of the story.
Let's talk about it.
So the story is essentially, and because I was thinking about this right from the beginning of the game, the character of Chloe, outside of this game, I hate her in every other game in the series. And there's a reason for that. It's because she's inherently not supposed to be a likable person, but she's supposed to. But I still, in this game, enjoy her and find her very interesting. And there's a reason for that, because they use the Angel Devil story structure to try to give Nate an arc, which is essentially Elena is the angel on Nate's shoulder. Chloe is supposed to be the devil on his shoulder. The problem is that around 80-90% of the way through the game, Chloe all of a sudden, just against her typical character motivations, decides to go along with the save the world plan. And all of a sudden, Lazarević, who is barely in the game, is the main antagonist who really has no relation to Drake whatsoever.
Oh, wait.
And you never really get a catharsis, because the whole catharsis of the story is supposed to be Nate deciding, rather than being a petty thief and doing things for his own interest, using his skills for a greater good, being namely to stop Lazarević.
Wait.
In this case,
because when they enter Shamballa, Chloe is still. I mean, that's right at the end of the game.
That's the scene I'm talking about. That scene makes no sense to me.
Because she still wanted to leave, though.
Yeah, no, she wanted to leave, and then it's just like, okay, let's go save your
world.
world.
That's because they. I mean, I don't know. I don't think you're giving that enough credit. Like
what I'm getting at is that it would have been more cathartic had Chloe gone to fight Lazarević with you. And yes, I agree. They probably should have changed up the actual gameplay of that boss fight. But I guess we can talk about that in a bit. But after you defeat Lazarević, Chloe gives into the temptation of the possibility of selling this, potential
Oh, so
weapon to somebody.
you would have preferred if Chloe
So,
went on with it, but then um just totally gave
but
into
then
the power.
and then you would either have to fight her, or through her own misdeeds, she meets a bad fate. You know Elsa Schneider from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. This is essentially the role she plays in Indy's character arc in that movie.
So like
Whereas Indy's father plays the role of him letting go of the obsession with the treasure and being content with, as Sean Connery says, illumination.
so
Whereas Elsa Schneider dies because she refuses to grab Indy's other hand and is reaching out for the Grail, and then her glove falls off and she falls into a pit.
so
It's not a one-to-one comparison, but you understand the
yeah,
dynamic.
I get what you're
trying to-
saying, but I never felt well, yeah. So Chloe spends much of the game being more out for herself than others.
But she's also trying to pull Nate back into that mindset. Whereas
Right,
Elena
right,
is,
I agree with the standpoint that you're giving of the devil and angel comparison. Chloe being the devil on Nate's shoulder, Elena being more of the angel. But I never, even though Chloe was more of the devil role, she herself wasn't a bad person. She was just a more selfish one.
yes, I agree with you. But the problem is that you need to show for the catharsis. You need to show where that path leads. It would have
there
made
was no consequence to her behavior.
yeah,
Is what
and
you're
she
saying.
gets a guy killed. She gets the innocent cameraman killed when she
Yeah.
double crosses them. So it's like,
Sure.
and so that's why I concluded that I think the reason I don't like Chloe in any other game is because she was a character specifically written for this game, and I think the reason that a lot of the ending doesn't land for this game. Most of the story I actually really like. It's up to around the 80% mark where it starts to get muddled. I think the reason they didn't stick the landing was specifically because they decided that they wanted to keep Chloe around, and then they had no idea what to do with Lazarević. And so at the end of the game, they try to turn Lazarević into essentially Nate's shadow, which, if you're not familiar with the Jungian concept of the shadow, it's just the mirror version of the hero. It's what the hero would be if they didn't control their power, and in this case, will. Like Schaefer is like, Nate, you need the will to complete this journey, and then Lazarević is talking about the will to do what is necessary. And it's like a complete breakaway from what the rest of the game seemed to be about, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Um,
I
Go
think
ahead.
I think you're putting a lot more meaning to the events of the game than the game actually is. Like I do think that looking back on this game, it wasn't as narratively strong as, like, in my opinion, Uncharted 4, and I think a lot of that has to do with uh what plays out with the characters that we have already grown to know and love. I still feel like at this point of Uncharted, we're just getting to know the dynamics of characters. And I feel like Lazarević, like, really didn't have any motivation, but I know you, with your, like, history background and, like, understanding the intricacies of what that might mean, you're applying more meaning to it than I think even Naughty Dog
Well,
intended to.
Lazarević, aside from I think Lazarević actually had the most clear motivation. He felt like he was destined to be. He's clearly based on Milosevic, who is, if you're familiar with the Balkans, the wars in the Balkans in the early '90s, he was a dictator. Serbia committed genocide against the Kosovars, the Muslim minority. Basically, Lazarević is the same thing. He's I would assume, a Serbian war criminal, as Elena tells us, and has his own private army. And he basically he feels like it's his destiny to conquer the world, and, he'll do anything to get it. And like he says at the end, I have the will to do what is necessary. That's what sets men like Hitler and Stalin apart. So, like, he has a motivation. Is it deep? No, but And
Well,
you know,
I don't necessarily think it has to be, you know.
Yeah.
exactly.
And
That's why I'm saying he's a shadow character of Nate. It's weird because that's not what the story was about up until like the last 10% of the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, just to go back, I want to go back to Chloe, like, because I do want to acknowledge like your idea about what Chloe could have done to like pay off her character a little more, um, with like taking the stone for herself and killing Lazarević. I kind of like that idea, but at the
And
same time,
then you have to face her down, or perhaps like the Guardians,
right?
whatever.
But at the
Yeah.
same time, like this isn't Chloe's story.
No,
Um,
but what I'm essentially saying is that she should have continued playing both sides to the very end, and then that is her
sure,
downfall. And
sure.
she is the primary antagonist.
But
It's kind of, you come to understand she's the primary antagonist, not Lazarević.
I still want to say, I see. I don't agree with that because I still want to say, like, at the end of the day, she's. I feel like she's more of an anti-hero in that she's playing both sides, but she still is a friend to Nate. She still is. Her allegiance is still with Nate, even if she doesn't agree with his heroics, even if she doesn't agree with him wanting to go on this, as she sees it, kind of a fool's errand. Um, she's more out for herself, but that doesn't necessarily make her a bad. I never saw it as her being a bad person. I don't think that was their intention either.
No.
She doesn't even need to be a strictly bad person. It's just that the way they wrote out the plot, the consequences of her action, like I said, she got that innocent cameraman killed.
Yeah, no,
She almost
I
got
agree with
Nate
that.
killed.
I
Like,
think even as much as I like the idea of her being like the actual final boss in the way you propose it, I think that's too much of an extreme to something that I overall do agree with. There is no consequence behind her actions, and I do
Yeah.
agree that maybe there should have been.
Yeah, and the thing is, there wasn't a single second, even when she like pulled the gun out and seemingly betrayed Nate. Even in that moment, it seemed like she was still trying to protect him. Like there wasn't any moment that I felt like she wasn't on Nate's side, but I do think that ultimately she had her end goal, and she was gonna meet that goal in whichever way it meant, and it wound up having some negative consequences. And like you said, I wish that they would have done something more with that, because she pretty much got away with being selfish until the very end, and then wind up on the good quote unquote good
yeah,
side.
that's the biggest thing, is that she seemingly just becomes a good guy at the end, and then it kind of goes against the structure of the entire rest of the story, where it ends with her telling Nate, go to Elena, which is like, no, that's the exact opposite of the role you played this entire story. And I'm not against her like potentially having like a redemption arc necessarily, but if they were going to do that where Chloe kind of is in a brighter light at the end of the story, then they needed to start some kind of development on that earlier in the story.
Yeah, I mean, I won't get into the Lost Legacy because maybe we could do our own episode on that, but
Yeah, that would be.
I don't I
But
don't
see,
think
that's the reason I don't play that game. I haven't played that game, is because like in 3 I didn't like Chloe, and I'm like, I don't know if I could play as her, but maybe it's good. I
yeah.
don't know. People say it's good.
Yeah, no, I love it,
It
but
is good,
I
but-
I guess the point I'm trying to make is she never stops being selfish completely. Like even her action of like telling like Nate be with Elena, I don't think that was a reflection of like her not being selfish and her being good. I think she just realized that like this human being that she cares about another human being. I don't even think she
Mhm.
loved him like Elena and him loved each other. I think they were just like honestly fuck buddies temporarily. That's the vibes that I
Oh yeah,
got.
they definitely were.
And she knew her place, and so she just made it clear like I know my place, like be with the person you love. And I thought that was like respectable, but it didn't make her like less selfish or a good person in my mind.
Right.
I mean, I think we could maybe take it further and say that like Chloe represents like that type of life for Nate, of like
That's what I'm saying.
picking
But
up
the
like
whole,
picking up like affairs and go and globetrotting and taking on these wild adventures and heists and stuff. And Elena represents going back that safe life of settling down.
Right.
And that's why it's
exactly.
so hard to talk about this game, because we have played
Right.
the future games and we
Yes.
see that it's not just Chloe, like it's actually Nate, that
Mhm.
kind of keeps going back to this lifestyle.
Right.
And
Right,
so
and-
like in that way, Elena never stops being the angel, but he has many, many devils.
Yeah.
And then that's the primary reason I say that there needed to be. She doesn't even necessarily need to die. There just needed to be some more definitive. I feel like at least some definitive push away from her to signify Nate going towards Elena.
I agree with you, but and I think Chloe's the more interesting character in this game because of this conversation we're having. Like, I feel like in what ways could they have? Because she didn't seem attached to anything, and that's really the point. Like, she doesn't attach herself to anything to avoid hurt, getting hurt or whatever. She seems like a person that stays very to herself, so that she doesn't ever have that consequence.
That's why my first instinct was to compare her to Elsa Schneider in The Last Crusade. Have either of you guys seen that movie?
I've not.
It's been years.
Okay.
Like college.
Elsa Schneider is the blonde chick that sleeps with Indy and then betrays him, and it revealed that she's with the Nazis. But then she also double crosses the Nazis at the end. And then she's like, Indy, we have the Grail. And he's like, no, don't cross the seal. And then because she crosses the seal with the Grail, the tomb starts collapsing.
I didn't say I wasn't gonna watch it, Jason.
Sorry. Basically, I'm trying to explain to you the fact that Elsa Schneider, she's really playing both sides the entire time just to get the treasure, because she's like Indy used to be, where Indy was just obsessed with getting the treasure. And it costs her life. I get
it. I think we're all in agreement already. Like,
yeah,
I agree. Like, there should have been. I agree with you. There should have been consequences for Chloe's actions, her selfish actions. I'm wondering if, like, when Harry went and exploded a grenade on himself, like, what if it was Chloe that had gotten hurt, and maybe that was the payoff? Maybe that would have been the consequence of all her actions leading up to that, her being mortally wounded. But then we wouldn't have Nate's realization and the whole character understanding of how much he cares for Elena, because Elena was the one that was mortally wounded towards the end, and he went through so much effort making sure Chloe looked after her and getting her out of there. That's kind of what clued Chloe off to how much he cares about her. So I'm not sure that would have been
you could still have Elena go in to the Tree of Life with you, and she gets, like, say Milosevic. Milosevic is the guy he's obviously based off. Lazarević mortally wounds Elena, and you basically have to escape Shamballa carrying Elena. But I don't know.
And then you have the situation of both of them being mortally wounded. How does he get them both out all on his own?
Oh, I thought you meant that she would that essentially Chloe would die in Shamballa.
Oh, I wasn't saying she would die. She would just be heavily wounded in place of Elena, and maybe that would be the consequence to her. It's all a moot point. The game is what it is. and I do agree with you. Like, she did need to face more consequence. I guess the consequences were that Nate was no longer gonna be with her. Like, I guess the consequences she doesn't get Nate. I
don't even think she cares about that, to be honest.
Oh, I think she did, because when she walked away, like, she did seem disappointed, and in her own little way. To where she also, she does, like, kind of they're both very alike. And in her walking away, she said she understands, but admit it, you're going to miss this ass, and then walks away. I think she was disappointed, but at the same time, like, she'll bounce back. Like, she's that kind of character. She's that kind of person where, yeah, that sucks. That sucks, but I'll be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, but they do differentiate her enough. Whereas, like, she's willing to kill. We see very early on that Nate, when they have the innocent guards at the museum, Nate doesn't want to shoot them. He's only willing to use the tranquilizer gun. little
Oh,
cool
well,
save the cat stuff like that that shows that, Nate is not as hard as these thieves that he's hanging out with necessarily.
and I guess
Um,
that's what brings us to our next point. Because we're in ending territory. We're talking about having entered Shambhala. I guess we could talk about, yeah, like the Chintamani stone. Really, what they're seemingly after is the sap from the tree of life, and
mhm.
that's what they found when Nate goes on the expedition with Tenzin, looking through Carl Schaefer's old Nazi pals. Like, he finds out that they were all corrupted, messed up people dressed as Yetis. And inside Shambhala itself, there are these big purple dudes that are kind of the guardians of Shambhala.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what the sap from the tree of life, the Chintamani stone, as they thought throughout the entire game, was kind of doing. It's giving them like monstrous amounts of power.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, Nate gets to face Lazarević after he goes to drink from he drinks the sap, and I mean he just kind of becomes angrier. His scar, you see his scars on his face heal up, and it's like, oh, that's supposed to showcase the power of the tree sap. But like, really, the bigger thing is you go to face Lazarević, and we'll talk about the boss fight itself. But this is what I want to talk about, and this is a common thing in Uncharted. We probably talked about it with the first episode. I don't remember.
No, we
And
didn't.
this is the only real time that this ever gets brought up in Uncharted, where Lazarević says to Nate, like, you're not much different from me. How many men have you killed today alone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's the only time Nate's mass murdering escapades get addressed outside of this gameplay where, like you said, like at the beginning of the game, like Harry goes to give Nate a gun and Nate's like, wait, what? We're not killing these guys. He's like, relax. It's just a fucking tranquilizer gun. It's like in the plot of the game, in the narrative, and this is where the phrase comes in, ludonarrative dissonance, Jason. Um, where the what you're doing in gameplay doesn't necessarily match the story that's trying to be conveyed. Nate is much more apprehensive about killing anyone in these cutscenes and in the overall plot of the game, yet
Not anyone.
outside of gameplay, huh?
Not anyone.
Not anyone, but like for the most part, like he's much more apprehensive than he is in just general gameplay where you just count headshots and murder waves and waves of dudes.
Yeah.
See, the reason, and we very briefly discussed, I don't buy and I've heard the arguments about ludonarrative dissonance with regards to this game. Obviously, everybody likes to poke fun at it. They call it like Uncharted Murder Fest and things like that. Lots of memes about it. The reason I don't buy it, so ludonarrative dissonance is, like Mark said, it was a term coined back in the early aughts about stark contrast between gameplay and the narrative in the game.
Specifically, it was coined by Clint Hocking in 2007. I believe mostly in reference to BioShock and Uncharted 1.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So the reason I don't buy that argument, and maybe a better argument would be verisimilitude, which is it's more on a person to person basis. Verisimilitude just refers to fiction in general. And do you buy into a world, or has the boundaries of believability for what that world is giving you, has that been stretched so far that you no longer buy into it? Is because all the people you're killing, most of the time, they're shooting at you first. Secondly, you're in a world in the Uncharted series where you're fighting like in particular in this one, you're fighting a mercenary army that has committed war crimes, essentially a stand-in for Nazis. You're fighting fucking supernatural beasts with super strength that are essentially animals that are just trying to kill you. Like, I don't understand, and I've never bought this argument about ludonarrative dissonance and Drake just being a murder machine. when this is essentially an action adventure game based on pulp novels and old TV serials where the heroes were doing the same exact thing. They were just killing all the bad guys in the room. So it's not like Uncharted is trying to establish a super realistic setting or plot. So it just and it's not like there are hundreds of other games where the same thing is happening. So it just it never really I never really understood why this came up with this series in particular. Indiana Jones is, I mean, obviously the body count isn't as high in
Yeah.
Indiana Jones because it's 2 hours of a movie.
Yeah.
I used to know the body counts like off the top of my head, but like in Temple of Doom, it's like it's almost, especially if you count like all the people who die when like he cuts the bridge off and they all fall down into the river with all the alligators or crocodiles or whatever. Like it's somewhere like 50 plus people. Like so, I don't know.
I I see what you're saying. To an extent, I agree with you. In Uncharted 2's case, it's still I feel like there's a mix of both, right? Like I see what you're saying with verisimilitude.
Verisimilitude, yeah.
Verisimilitude, yeah. Learning new words every day, guys. I see what you're saying with regards to that, but as far as the ludonarrative dissonance is concerned, like that's why I bring up this game in particular, and definitely wanted to have it as a talking point. Is Lazarević does directly speak to Nate and say like, "You're just like me," and Nate. There's so many points in the plot of this game where it's brought up that Nate is trying to be heroic. He's trying to save the world. He's trying to save
Yeah.
all these people. And I get what you're saying. Like I understand. It's like a private military owned by this crazed warlord. Why should there be like any sort of remorse for killing them after they shoot at you first?
They're stock bad guys.
Right. But I guess it's just like even with that, and that this isn't a war game, right? It is like a pulp adventure game. Like you don't expect Nate to have like a realistic reaction of like the first time a soldier murders or kill somebody. You know, I get that. But in a title and a series where Nate is the protagonist, very clearly the protagonist and considered a hero and somebody you're constantly rooting for, he does murder a whole bunch of people, and it only gets worse game per game. And it's
But
not.
then you'd have to argue that the same applies to Indiana Jones.
Sure.
That's my problem with this whole argument.
Okay.
I mean, granted, you wouldn't call it ludonarrative dissonance because there's no gameplay
there's no
involved.
Ludo.
Yeah, exactly. There's no gameplay involved.
It would just be
But
narrative
I mean,
dissonance.
it would just be verisimilitude being broken. But your verisimilitude and ludonarrative dissonance are almost the same thing. Ludonarrative dissonance is just another way to say verisimilitude for games because you're adding gameplay in there.
I would
but
say
it's
I
the
would
same-
say
it's the same-
verisimilitude is probably a wider net.
Yes, exactly. Because it can describe any kind of fiction. But all I'm saying is that then when you watch Indiana Jones, you'd have to be like, "Oh, this is a shitty movie, and I don't believe this because he's killing all these Nazis."
No one says anything is bad or good because of this one way or the other. It's just I feel like it's something important to be brought up because because when a game addresses it head on like this one does at the end, it is a question to be asked.
Yeah, and I think that was a dumb line to put in there anyway. Like I said before, the game bringing in the whole concept of Drake, do you have the will? You and Schaefer's like, you must believe, Drake. It's like that wasn't really the problem, the inner conflict in Drake throughout the rest of the game. The rest of the game, his inner conflict is, am I gonna, be a force for good, or am I gonna just be a petty thief?
Another thing that I kind of didn't I meant to talk about and bring up is I find it with regards to like the writing and the plot of the story. I find it kind of ridiculous that Nate has trouble believing these like supernatural forces until he like sees them after the first game.
Yeah. And
Well,
he
that-
even makes a joke about it, like if zombies show up, I'm gonna flip my shit or whatever.
That was
that
early
is an
on.
argument. That is an argument I do buy, especially and that also applies to Indiana Jones because technically Temple of Doom takes place before
Yeah,
Raiders.
it's a prequel.
So it's like, why is Indiana Jones so hesitant to believe in the Ark? The same thing with the Holy Grail. Um, so that is a legitimate argument to make.
Yeah, he is very apprehensive to believe that the supernatural forces at play here. When he's in the Tibetan village and just kind of wants to peace out, and Schaefer's trying to tell him no, go look at my expedition.
The one thing I will say about that scene though is that because he just came off that train after trying to rescue Chloe, and of course Chloe fucks him over and he gets shot, and the whole beginning that we were talking about, he's hanging off by dear life. So that's what happened just before that scene where Schaefer is trying to explain to him, and then Nate says, "No, everything. I don't want to keep doing this. Everything I do turns to shit." So it's not. I don't think that scene was so much about he didn't believe in it necessarily as much as he felt like everything he was doing was just getting fucked up.
No, there was
Schaefer,
a point. There was a point
Schaefer,
where he was in disbelief. Sorry, go ahead.
All I was gonna say was I think Schaefer sending him with Tenzin to go see the expedition was more to give him motivation why he needs to continue rather than him necessarily not believing.
There was a point. There was a point though where he had a moment of disbelief though, because Elena had to reaffirm it and tell him, like, Nate, why wouldn't you believe it? We've seen stuff like this before.
Yeah. No. I'm not saying I'm not saying he never did. I was just saying for that particular scene.
I gotcha. All right, so are there any other story bits or character bits that we want to talk about before we move on to just the last few topics that I've got?
No.
I just wanted to see how you guys felt like when they finally get out of Shambhala and Elena is on the rock pedestal by the stairs, the entrance, and she's dying, and then all of a sudden it just fades to black, and then it fades back, and they're just back at the village, and she's like fully healed. There's like no explanation, and Sully's there. There's just like no explanation of how all this came together.
I think because I think
it's not important, but
yeah.
I just found that like weird.
I think like the implication was like Sully had to come and help them get out. I think it was kind of like implied that it had been like maybe a week or so. Like she had time to recover. She wasn't just immediately healed and fine. Like she was still recovering, and it had been.
I just more meant how the fuck did they get her back to the village? And
yeah,
you could see like all the shrapnel that like fucked her up.
Well, that's
granted,
like...
this goes back to the verisimilitude, like ludonarrative dissonance, where like it's a pulp action thing, so you just assume she could survive in the same way that Nate is shot in the train when he's climbing up. So
yeah, well, it even comes to the and it even comes to the question of just like and this goes for the first game. This goes for really every fucking game where like you had to do all that shit to get in there. Like now you're like, how are you getting out? You have to make all those jumps and do all those. It comes down to the question of like, if you're going to question that, then you kind of have to question how the hell did these ancient...
how you guys felt about that. Like, I found it funny.
I mean, this is like not ludonarrative, but like narrative dissonance. Yeah, like you said, verisimilitude of like, did these ancient civilizations really like put these puzzles together and make these ancient massive stone contraptions? Like how the hell did they do that?
Yeah, that's just at that point though, I would have to say we're just getting into nitpicking because that's just the genre.
Right, but that still begs the question of, with all that in mind and them having to have done all that in order to enter Shambhala, how the hell did they get out with Elena on their back?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's kind of like
you go with it.
You just kind of have to take it for granted.
I never even thought about it until now. I've just accepted it.
Again, I wanna stress this because I said this for the last Uncharted game that we went over, the first one. Like I'm going like really in depth, but really like my only criticisms are like that last 20%, and it's mainly story criticisms. Like the first 80% of the game was like fucking blast. I was loving what was going on plot wise. I was loving what was going on gameplays and plot wise and story and characters. Like I fucking almost I in one sitting I almost beat this game, and it felt like back in the old days where I would sit down and I would be like, all right, I'm just gonna sit and play Metal Gear Solid 2 in one sitting, like,
Ugh.
and I didn't even realize it. Like I got up and it was like your game is 85% complete. I'm like, holy shit! I didn't even realize like the game. I was having so much fun. The game just went by so fast.
Speaking of, Dead Cell Media, Reap the Spoils does have an episode out for Metal Gear Solid 2. Go check that out if you played that game. Anyway, yeah, no, I gotcha. And that kind of brings up another question, or begs another question that I kind of want to ask. With the setting, we kind of have a huge setting shift from the first game taking place on like a remote jungle island, to this time primarily there's a section earlier in the game you're in a museum, and then there's a brief section where you're in the rainforest in Borneo, but largely a good chunk of this game takes place in snowy environments.
Yeah.
Did we and really the majority of the game takes place in like East and Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Was this a setting we enjoyed? Did you guys like the change of scenery?
I think the variety. I mean, I inherently love like desert settings. I think that's one of the reasons I'm so drawn to the third one. That's why I think you guys both like the second one over the third one, but I prefer the third one.
I prefer 2 over 3 for other reasons, but when we probably inevitably do an episode on 3, we'll get into that conversation.
Right. But I'm just naturally attracted to like desert settings. But in terms here of like the variety I think if you think about it, when you include like the urban setting and the village setting and all that stuff, I think this has the most variety out of the entire series, even 4. And I think it has some of the most inspired settings. So I think they did the best job in that sense with this game in the entire series.
Well, what's nice about this setting is they do 2 things. They ease you in from the landscapes and setting of 1 into where you are in 2 by like the Istanbul Museum aside, starting you in the Bornean rainforest and easing you into that urban setting, and then into Greater Tibet with the snowier landscapes in the Tibetan village. Mm-hmm. They kind of do a nice transition even in 2 from the setting of 1 into the setting of 2, which I think is nice. And they also managed to keep it all within a reasonable geographic area.
Right.
Like I said, the majority of the game takes place in East and Southeast Asia. It's pretty contained in that part of the globe.
You're basically constantly going up the Himalayas.
Yeah. So I think they do an interesting kind of an interesting transition there while keeping it realistic.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot more variety, which I like. I always like to see different landscapes and vistas. I feel like the first game was mostly just jungle, that I can remember. But I do think that the other Uncharted's, at least 4 from most recent memory, also had a nice variety as well.
Yeah, that it's definitely something I want to bring up more for the next entry whenever we do an episode on that, because there it's much more a point of contention. But I did want to bring up the shift and the transition in this one, just because I thought it was a neat touch. That could be analyzed. The bigger question I want to ask is, on the topic of like how the hell did they just get out of Shamballa? Some other things that I feel like we just kind of have to take for granted but make absolutely no sense is, how does Nate stay warm in jeans?
He also had his like sweater.
He had like that jacket,
long sleeve. Like he got the jacket eventually, but before that, he had his like sleeves.
Yeah, well,
like, pushed up.
He almost died from hypothermia. Yeah, and like the whole opening segment of the game and the end media res section and therefore where it continues in the middle of the game. Like, yeah, he almost dies of hypothermia, and then Tenzin, when Asteroid rescues him and they go on the expedition, like he just hands him that like really thick jacket, but he's still wearing jeans and sneakers. Like, how the fuck did he live with that? Like his whole top half was protected, but not the bottom.
I wear jeans and blizzards and shit when I got a shovel. But,
but that's just like
the better question would be, how does Indiana Jones not pass out from heat when he's wearing a leather jacket in the middle of a fucking North African desert?
Yeah, well, that's the kind of those are the hard hitting questions I want to ask on Read the Spoils. Like, I don't know, man. I have really bad dry skin. If I was just wearing jeans and like the Tibetan tundra, I would not be okay. How did we feel about the Tibetan village segment? Because we never really got like a quiet. I mean, keep in mind there's only one game before this, but this was like a very big change of pace where you kind of wake up and you have a walking segment.
I think it was very well placed. This game overall, and I guess we'll talk about it. We'll talk about gameplay in a bit, but I felt overall this game had some of the best pacing in the series. And I felt like it was placed perfectly right after you have the train sequence. And I mean the train sequence where it's actually moving and you're going along it. That huge long running action sequence followed by you got to stand your ground in the crash train wreckage.
I do want to say on the topic of the train segment before we move on from that, it's like design brilliance that they were.
Oh my god! Still.
Mm-hmm.
Like progressing up, further up on the train, and when you get to certain cars, that's when they start introducing obstacles, and at no point does it feel like it's an obvious transition. Like, it feels very natural.
Yeah.
But it's just all like visual and design trickery.
And the way it's constantly ratcheting up the tension. First, you got to fight that one guy in the car who can like one-shot you, but you can't. He's very hard to take down, and if he gets anywhere close to you, he can also one-hit you, kill you. I think with his melee, and there's nowhere to go. You can't go back on the train, so you got to find out how to beat him in that one car, and then it ratchets it up again with a helicopter coming in, and you got the anti-air gun. So it's very well a good use of tension building.
Yeah, I was going to talk more about this when we got into gameplay, but it's still one of the best set pieces in video games in terms of like level design and how it introduces the obstacles and the enemies and how you can approach, like you have to like either go in the train or go above the train or go behind the enemy instead of facing it forward. And it's really genius even in 2021. And I think that throughout the game, they start introducing those mechanics in interesting ways. But I feel like that locomotive chapter is where they brought it all together. It was almost as if that felt like the last boss and not Lazarević, because that's when the level design just went to shit. But we'll get there.
That all being said, I feel like that fucking train, I mean, it spans 2 chapters. I feel like it lasts way longer than it needs to. I feel like there should have been some cars cut and made that all into 1 chapter, and it would have been fine.
I think once you get to the tunnel, like underground, is when it's like the pacing feels bad, but I quite enjoyed everything up until then.
It's like, it's just some of the cars, like with just like generic thugs. If you cut those ones out and like keep just the more interesting ones, like when you get to the car that's holding the logs and the guy with the Gatling gun is on it, and you have to figure out that you have to shoot the strap locks off so that he'll fall off, and the turret with the keep all of that. That's obviously what we're mostly there for. But the other trains with just like generic thugs that you have to like kind of sneak around and figure out how to cut some of that out, just because it felt like that segment, especially because I went back to do a speed run. That whole segment just feels like it takes forever.
Yeah.
And spanning
Actually, that
2
was
chapters.
The only speed run that I did effectively on my first try.
Yeah, I got through that with like less than a minute to spare, by the way.
Oh, wow.
It was rough. It was really
I had like
rough.
a minute and 30 seconds left.
My
first try.
I was very, very close. I cut it very close to the wire. But anyway, continue. Go ahead, Jason. With the point you were making with the pacing.
Oh no, I was just saying in general, this game, the way they shift between platforming and or platforming slash puzzles. Again, like there's actually not that many puzzles in this game. It's the same thing we said, or at least I felt, just like with the last game. There's surprisingly few puzzles when you think about it, and they generally don't outlast their welcome, which is nice. But the way the game is able to shift and perfectly time between climbing slash puzzle elements, environmental set pieces, an action segment, a little more climbing to navigate around, an action segment, maybe an action set piece, then some narrative focus like a cutscene or something. It always feels like it's flowing. It always feels like it's revving on firing on all cylinders. Sorry, revving on. What the fuck am I talking about? It always feels like it's firing on all cylinders. It's always going. It never feels like it slows down or gets bogged down in anything. I never felt like I wanted to stop playing or I needed to stop playing or that the game was boring me. Like I said, the game went by very fast I think it took me like 10 hours to play. I almost beat it in one sitting.
Mm-hmm.
I just played like all Saturday night.
None of the set pieces dragged out too much, and each gameplay sequence felt unique enough that you didn't feel like you were just, oh, here's a section with enemies, let's shoot them, and whatever. Oh, here's a section with cars, action scene. I feel like they mixed it up a lot. I feel like they did master that in Uncharted 4, where that's the peak of that. But in this game, they definitely did it very well, especially for that time.
I
think a lot of it also has to do with combat, which we all had big problems with in the last game. And going back and listening to what we said about combat in the first one, a lot of things I feel like got addressed in this one.
Yeah, because I think it's safe to say we all think that this game aged far better than the first game did.
Oh hell yeah.
Yeah, and I think
yes.
I agree with both of you in that a lot of that came down to two things, like level design and the pacing of the set pieces and the level design and the combat. Because whereas in one you would just be kind of going from arena to arena with tons and tons of waves of enemies coming at you.
Yeah.
Maybe from different directions to shake things up. That was their method of shaking things up. This game instead brought you on a more like linear path but like a winding one where there's verticality, sometimes there's a puzzle element going on, but it's not waves and waves of enemies. It's a batch of enemies that you have to figure out how to deal with in the area that you're in, and that's it. You move on after that. Maybe to another batch of enemies, maybe to another set piece, maybe to another puzzle. And puzzles is another thing that I want to touch on. I'm using the word puzzle a little loosely here, but the like of all the things that this game improves on the most, I think combat is definitely one of them. Just because the situations you're put in make a lot more sense and don't feel as video gamey.
Yeah,
because it's not just 5 dudes. Okay, now fight 7 dudes. Okay, now fight 10 dudes. Okay, now we're going to send in only 3 dudes, but they all have shotguns. It's like it all feels much more believable.
Yeah, and to your point of the puzzles, none of them were too hard where you're spending so much time trying to wrap your head around it, but it wasn't so easy where it's like, okay, 1, 2, 3, boom, like this was a dumb like 1996 puzzle or something like that.
My issue, and this is kind of funny considering what I brought up a little bit ago. Of like how did these ancient civilizations like put together these wild contraptions? My problem with the puzzles is I felt like there were way too few of them in this game.
Well,
one, two, three or four of them.
It depends on what you mean by puzzle, because you could count like certain things as puzzles, like the part where Chloe and Nate drop into that get dropped down that trap, and the ceiling is coming down on them with spikes, and you have to figure out, I gotta shoot the Yeah,
Yeah.
the gears.
crank.
To make sure that it's
The
not
gear.
continuously coming down. Like, if you want to count that as a puzzle, that's fine. I'm thinking of puzzles.
Matching the shape to the
More so
symbol.
moments where
the colors to the animals.
more so moments when Nate needs to take out his notebook.
Yeah.
To me, that is what I'm constituting as like a major puzzle. And in this game, there's only like 2 of those. It's when you have when you're in the big room in the temple with the statue that you have to move its arms, which is really simple and much more of a climbing puzzle of. It's not hard to figure out how the arms have to go. It's more challenging figuring out how to get up to them, which it's disappointing to me that's the puzzle the puzzle design that they went with there. The only true puzzle I'd say is like the 2 towards the end where you have to take the blocks and put them on the things and match them up with the animals and the colors and
the symbols you have to rotate.
Yeah, which is just a dumbed down version of the one that you just did. And that to me that was pretty disappointing. It was kind of I feel like I didn't notice it the first time I played the game all those many years ago. It was more noticeable when I replayed the game when Nathan Drake Collection came out, and definitely noticeable now. Where I just felt like there wasn't enough puzzles.
I think they definitely improved upon that in later games once again.
Yeah.
But I feel like why I don't mind it is because it sets it apart from a game like Tomb Raider, where at least Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Yeah, it's like mostly puzzles. Like you're spending times in the tomb, especially Shadow, because they kind of like went into the actiony survival actiony phase a little bit, but then Shadow really leaned into like the puzzle. The whole game was a puzzle,
I guess
basically.
I think it's a design philosophy thing, because if you think about it, they have, you said 22 months, less than 2 years of development.
Yeah,
it's like you also have to keep in mind this is before the age of AAA game development is going to take 5 years, and we're going to cram every single genre into each game that we make.
I would argue that it's the very, very start of that.
It's
yeah.
In terms of the time frame, yes.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think makes this game so great is that it picked a few things to do and stuck to it and did them well. For the most part, did them very well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't entirely disagree. It just, I don't know. I found it a little disappointing. I feel like there were less puzzles in this one than there were in Uncharted 1. Maybe not by a lot, but it felt much more noticeable in this game. And to me, that was kind of disappointing.
Yeah.
I felt like there was a lot more climbing and not like environmental puzzles. Like you had to navigate
like there were a lot of micro puzzles, like you said, environmental puzzles, finding the way to climb to get to the way forward. Like there were much more of those, but I don't know. A lot of it comes down to, and the reason I bring up Nate's notebook is because that's such a cool piece, right? That's such a cool gameplay element. Taking out his notebook and scrolling through the pages, seeing the notes that he's taken down, seeing the stupid little doodles he makes of Sully. Like, it's such a cool piece of set dressing to page through, and getting fewer opportunities to take that out and look through it.
Right. It's underutilized.
It's underutilized. Yeah. It's very, very underutilized.
I agree.
Question, just because the newer Tomb Raiders didn't come out until really after Uncharted 3 did. Did like the older Tomb Raiders have a lot of that kind of thing? Or
yeah, Shadow of the Tomb Raider was more similar to the older Tomb Raiders in that it was mostly puzzles and tombs.
Okay.
You were actually Tomb Raiding.
Tomb Raider's weird because like it's funny, we're talking about ludonarrative dissidents and Nate being a murderer. Like Tomb Raider has always kind of taken that head on that Lara Croft is like a female Rambo.
Yeah.
Even the newer ones, like they really go all in on like fucking kill animations and death sequences and shit like that. But at the same time, like Delilah says, there's a lot more emphasis on, all right, there's all of these tombs and dungeons scattered throughout the levels, the map. You don't even have to go into a lot of them unless you want to, you're a collector, you want to get your trophies and whatnot. But
Yeah.
that's where you want to go if you're looking for more of that.
Okay.
Yeah. I wonder how, now that we know there's an Indiana Jones game coming out, and we know that Uncharted and even Tomb Raider, to an extent, are very influenced from Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what direction that game. We don't have to talk about it, but I do wonder, like, if it's gonna lean more into like Uncharted or Tomb Raider, or if it's gonna like find its own kind of its own gameplay sequence, because those games feel very different from each other, and anyone that says any differently has not played them. Tomb Raider's survival horror, survival
Tomb Raider
with puzzles.
It's far more intense.
Yeah. Uncharted is, like you said, pulp, like third person gunplay.
It's a fun adventure.
Indiana Jones would be even more lighthearted than, because Indy very rarely uses. He's got a fucking 6-shooter, like, and he rarely uses it. It's going to be a lot more melee focused. But let's not talk about Indiana Jones, because that's not what we're here. Well,
even though we talked about it.
Yeah. We're not here to talk about Indiana Jones and Uncharted. I don't have much more that I want to talk about. Like, I feel like we've pretty much hit on everything else.
I just wanted to mention one of the cool things, improvements I thought. The gameplay, the ammo economy, the variety of weapons, the fact that enemies weren't always carrying shotguns. So with this playthrough in particular, I did an experiment where I almost never took cover unless I really needed to, and unless I absolutely had to kill an enemy, I never used L2. I was always blind firing or running and gunning.
Okay.
And I was able to get through the entire game. Like, I was just constantly swapping weapons that were on the ground, like running into enemies and just pistoling them and shotgunning them, or running and fucking dragging my AK-47 one-handed behind me. And it was just so much fucking fun, as opposed to the gunplay of the first game where you felt like you were just you were dropped into a pit, and all the enemies were jumping down on you with shotguns.
Yeah, definitely the first one in terms of combat gunplay was harder because it was A, more janky, and B, they threw out so many enemies at you, and the level design wasn't as crafty where you could kind of approach it differently. This one definitely felt easier, but in a good way, because the gunplay felt better. There was stealth, like you had more opportunities to pick, whatever guns you wanted. They had a more variety of guns. The only thing that really pissed me off was the last boss. That kind of ruined everything.
Uncharted, Uncharted's never had a really good history with final bosses.
Yeah.
Again, with all the things that it culminates in, like 4 is probably has the best final boss, but
for sure.
Like 1 is just like, it's just a wave after wave after wave until you actually get to the person that's the boss, and then it's a bunch of quick time events and maybe one manual punch. This one actually is the only one that I'd argue in the original trilogy that actually felt like a boss. And it's a little frustrating.
I don't know why they ever even did final bosses, because the whole point of the stories that they're trying to emulate is that they usually culminate in the villains dying by their own faults.
That's kind of the thing, though, right? Is like, this is the only one that actually feels like a final boss. All the other ones was just like in 1, it's just you shooting down thugs until you can reach them, and then it's just a bunch of quick time events. I think 3 is to not say too much about it, because I don't want to talk about it in this episode, but like, it is kind of what you're saying, and then it's just quick time events. This is like the only one that's like that actually does feel like a final boss, and I get it, like why, like Lazarević spent this whole game like trying to get to this this thing or this stuff, as we later find out, and like it would kind of be a shame for him to become like all powerful without us like kind of fighting him in any regard. The way they go about it though is, it's not perfect.
Yeah,
it's far from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But
like it's just weird that like the lead up to that, where we're the game's just tossing us like minigun after minigun and RPG after RPG, and you have these really cool battle arenas that you're fighting in. Those feel like more of a boss fight in some ways than the actual boss fight.
Yeah, and really, it is kind of thematically apt that like the one thing that can really damage Lazarević is the stuff that he's been after all along. Like the idea behind the idea behind the boss fight is shooting the clumps of sap that are around while he's near them.
It's just very clunkily designed.
Yeah,
and I don't know how you could not make it clunky. It just feels like something that would come off better in a cutscene.
Yeah.
I did think it would be more frustrating. I thought the whole game would be more frustrating than it was on Crushing. As far as difficulty is concerned, I remember when I played through this originally on PS3, I had a really hard time with Crushing on 1, and 2 was like easier, but it was still a rough time going. I tried to do like a mix of what you were saying, Jason, like picking up weapons as you go, and I did a lot of blind firing, but pretty much always from cover. Like you can't really not take cover.
Whenever I got a sniper rifle, I was trying to do blind fires with sniper rifles to see if I could do it. It was so hard.
Yeah.
I mean, when the game like becomes more challenging, like when they throw these new enemies at you, you have to blind fire to be successful. And
yes.
I remember watching like Troy Baker and Nolan North play their games, and they like completely did not use the blind firing, and I was just like screaming through YouTube, like blind fire, you won't die so much.
Yeah. No. I don't get why, like, because they were giving you so many like heavy weapons like miniguns and shit right before, why like they didn't somehow design it so that you were in like a situation where you're using some special weapon against.
I would say they still wanted to make the stakes high, right? And giving you RPGs and miniguns and shit going into that fight, it would I feel like it would go against like what Nate is about. And I feel like
that's a fair point.
And it also would just like how are the stakes high at that point, like yeah, sure, he's a big mean warlord that's about to become fucking souped up in blue, but like, and purple and shit, but like, you're still going in there with rockets and stuff. Like I think feel like it would go against the ethos.
Fixed that fight was just opening up the level a little bit. It was too claustrophobic, and not in a good way where you felt like you could maneuver like in a RE or in a Resident Evil game.
You didn't even know where he was. Like
you didn't know where he was. Yeah, it was a mess. It just you had getting caught on shit.
You had to run away and climb and jump over chasms and stuff while also looking behind you so you could get a shot off on a sap while he was near it. Like, yeah, it was a little tough. And then as it goes on, he starts throwing like 5 grenades at you at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not even hard. It's just dumb.
Yeah, like it's not. It's definitely far from a perfect boss fight, but it is like the most boss fighty final boss that Uncharted has ever really given us, at least in the original, as far as the original trilogy is concerned.
I think I think that's why they kind of slipped away from it in the third one, because they realized like, because I've heard that complaint from elsewhere. So
yeah,
it's not just us.
I think we've established that we definitely need to do an episode on Uncharted 3 at some point. But
probably Uncharted 4.
Oh yeah, I definitely want to talk Uncharted 4. Full disclosure to the audience, we did do a spoiler cast on Uncharted 4 when it came out for a previous publication we all were at, but we don't want to just tell you to go there. We want to give you something fresh.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything else before we move on to the final question and wrap this guy up?
Well, I just thought it was funny how Nathan Drake is obsessed with butts.
Yeah.
And if you have to figure out who has the best butt, the answer is Victor Sullivan.
I love that line. Like, I love that line at the end. It's like, "You dirty old man."
Oh yeah,
and then
when he was leaving to go with Chloe.
Yeah.
And then even going with him through the jungle. You have a nice ass, Sully.
Yeah.
See, that goes back to what you were saying though at the beginning, the writing, how much it improved. Like,
Yeah.
that final conversation between Drake and Elena is actually really well done. Like, how scared were you on a scale of 1 to 10? He's like, oh, 4.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, what's a 10? Clowns. I don't like clowns. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah, and you could chalk up the plastic writing in the first one to just like it being the first game you're introducing these characters, but like I still couldn't get past it in that one. In this one, a lot of the characters we know, but even the ones that are introduced fresh, like Harry and Elena, like we were introduced to Harry at the beginning of the game with Nate and his conversation at the bar, and like you get the sense that they've worked together before, and nothing feels like it's phoned in. It all feels very natural. And then when Chloe comes in and Nate knows who she is, but they're like pretending they don't know who each other are, like it's all really well done, and it still conveys to the audience pretty clearly of what we're supposed to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
The writing just is it's the thing improved most, second only to the level and enemy design, combat design. In terms of improvements.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But okay. Any other things to bring up?
No.
The final question, I couldn't. It's hard to think of like a final question for a game like this that's over a decade old and we've played to death. But I guess I just want to know: do you guys still feel this game is worthy of the praise that it's received the past decade?
I think if you're looking at it from a 2009 perspective, hell yeah. But
yeah,
if I'm comparing it to the last few games that I played since then, like no, like other games have taken what that game does and done it better in many ways. Although I feel like that locomotion chapter is really hard to match.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I was talking about before, there are very few games in like my history of gaming where I would be willing to go back again and again and again and just replay them and play them in one sitting, like on a Friday night or a Saturday night, like Metal Gear 2, Metal Gear Solid, I'm sorry, 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, Resident Evil 4, like, and the fact that I almost played this game all the way through, the only reason I stopped was because my eyes hurt and I needed to go to sleep because I'm tired. Because I'm older now. That I think that's a testament in and of itself and how well it held up. Mm-hmm. So I guess I could say it's worthy of the praise for all like the nitpicking and like nowadays, how crotchety I am about my stories. The story is still very, very, very fun. Like, yeah, I don't think they like absolutely hammered in the ending in the same way they would later on in the series.
Mm-hmm.
But like for the most part, you're constantly pulled in, I feel like.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I would agree with both of you, really. Yeah, for at the time, like this game was huge. Everything it was doing for the medium, it, with these massive set pieces and just breaking boundaries, it was massive for that time. But I think even from the lens of now and everything we've come, not even within Uncharted, just like video games in total, like I still feel like this is a landmark video game, and for the genre and for the medium,
for sure.
And still,
it really kind of created almost a genre that has evolved, obviously, since then. But it kind of created a new AAA genre.
Yeah, and I feel this game really, it holds up in ways that Uncharted 1 never could, and even arguably Uncharted 3 never could. But we'll get to that in a future episode of Reap the Spoils. But yeah, we good to wrap this guy
Yeah.
up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My score
Oh yeah.
would be 8 what are they called?
Purbas.
Purbas, yes. 8 purbas out of 10.
All right. I didn't.
Nice.
I haven't played this in a while. We haven't played the Jason test in some time. Jason, did you go hunting for any of the treasures?
Well, a lot of them already were gone because in previous playthroughs
Oh,
I
okay.
had them.
Okay.
But when I saw a new one, I did go for it.
Okay.
And
Nice.
I felt like that was fun. Like the environmental puzzles, especially later on, to get to some of them were really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them are really well hidden.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were also like so obvious, like practically on the beaten path, and somehow last time I played the game I didn't get them.
Mm-hmm.
Like I must have just been like super gung ho about finishing the game, and just didn't care about anything else because I barely got any treasures the last.
I
I
think I got a silver trophy for treasures, so I must have most of them. I don't know.
Nice.
Well, cool. Yeah, if this is your first time listening to Reap the Spoil, shame on you because you should have listened to the Uncharted 1 episode first. But just kidding. Delilah, you got anything to plug? What are you working on?
Oh, I will be streaming and recording the Medium when it comes out in a few weeks. That'll be like the newest thing.
Cool.
Honestly, I've just been streaming random games. Like I streamed Uncharted and I edited that down and put it on YouTube.
You had an awesome Cyberpunk review.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I did review that while I was like mourning and grieving, but whatever. I did it. And yeah, I just played Battletoads for the first time, not the original, the new Battletoads.
Cool.
Me and Matt played that on stream, so I'm gonna edit that and post that on YouTube hopefully this week. But until then, like really not anything substantial until the Medium.
Did you give up on Ni no Kuni or just take a break?
I took a break because when I was continuing that game, it was right before the PS5 came out, so
Fair
I
enough.
just couldn't. And
Which one are you playing, 1 or 2?
1,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I platinum 2, but 1 I want to at least beat. But
Oh, you actually played 2. Okay.
yeah, I did.
I don't really have anything to plug. I don't even know what I'm playing. Oh, I just beat Shadow of Mordor. Oh, I watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy for the first time like a week or two ago.
Cool.
Never saw those before. That was a good time.
Nice.
So it's like
On brand.
that's like I've never seen Star Wars, or more aptly, I've never seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. How did you not see those when you were a kid?
Because, like, when I was a kid, like, I was talking to this, I forget who I was talking to about this, but, like, when I was a kid, like, the things that I latched on to, I feel like there were, like, 3 big things when I was a kid, and, like, you only, like, latch on to 2 of them, and, like, 1 gets left behind, I feel. And, like, the 2 of the 3 things that I latched on to were Star Wars, because the prequels were happening at that time, and Harry Potter. And those were the two things that I managed to latch onto when I was a kid, and Lord of the Rings was the one that slipped by. I forget whoever I was talking to about it, like it was Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, and Harry Potter's the one that slipped by. It's like you only get 2 and one of them has to go.
Interesting.
Yeah. But loved them. They were great movies. I enjoyed them. Shadow of Mordor, I didn't like
best
very
trilogy
much.
ever.
Yeah. Shadow of Mordor, not my favorite.
It's heresy, breaks canon.
We'll talk about that maybe off air. Other than that, yeah, I don't really have anything to plug or talk about. Jason.
I don't have anything to play. Why do you even fucking ask me?
I was gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you what's the next game we're playing, but you know.
Oh, we're playing Bug Snacks. Bug Snacks.
We're gonna be
next
talking about Bug Snacks.
I don't even know what the fuck this is, ladies and gentlemen. So
I'm so
I got no
looking
idea
forward
what
to
I'm
the
into.
episode.
Yeah, this is like I played it. I was so excited to play it.
I feel like I got to do some drugs while I'm on this one. Like
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a horror game with a Pokemon Snap skin.
I'm really excited for this episode too, because I don't know where anyone's gonna come at with this one. I played it. I was really excited to play it because I loved Octodad, so I really like Young Horses, the studio behind it. I was really excited to see what new project they would make, and this game really took me by surprise in where it goes. So I'm really excited to talk about it, and I hope you are too.
Like and subscribe. Give us some comments.
Yeah, if you liked this episode, if you're listening to it on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe to the channel. Leave us a comment, let us know what you liked, let us know what you didn't like. We would love feedback so we know where and what we have to improve. If you listen to this on Apple Podcasts, please give us a rate and review, 5 stars preferred. Again, in the review, tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like.
Another thing, given that this is an Uncharted episode, it'd be really cool in the comments if you guys could vote who is the best character in the Uncharted series.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Because we all know it's Tenzin.
So yeah, leave us feedback. Let us know. Obviously, it would mean a lot if you did that at all, but it would mean extra a lot if you would give us that 5-star review. Those are mighty nice. You can follow me on Twitter at Nibelheimi, and you can follow Delilah on Twitter at Assassina_San. You can follow Jason on Twitter at SolidQuaz, but don't follow him. He doesn't do anything on there.
Yeah.
He's got nothing. And you can follow Dead Cell Media at Dead Cell Media. If you want to know when the next episode goes live, that'll be tweeted there. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.